You hear the rustle of silk behind you, followed by laughter that doesn't belong in a place like this. Your pulse quickens as candlelight flickers across marble walls, casting shadows that seem to dance with a life of their own. Through the archway ahead, you glimpse movement, bodies in motion, the glint of gold, the scatter of something small and round across the floor. Your hand steadies against the cold stone column as you realize what you're witnessing. The moment when the throne of St. Peter became a stage for the unspeakable, when the keys to heaven were held by hands stained with desire so consuming it would crack the foundations of Christendom itself. This is October 31st, 1501, and you are about to witness what no soul should ever see within these sacred walls, an evening so depraved that scribes would bury the truth in Latin, seal it in archives, and pray that centuries might cleanse what one night had corrupted. Before we descend deeper into this forbidden chapter, I'd genuinely love to know, where in the world are you watching this from? It absolutely fascinates me that we're connected right now, across continents and centuries, drawn together by curiosity about a night that people once tried desperately to erase from memory. The man who orchestrated that evening was born Rodrigo de Borgia in 1431, in the sun-bleached town of Játiva near Valencia. Nothing about his childhood suggested he would one day hold absolute power over the souls of Christendom, but destiny moves through bloodlines, and when his uncle Alfonso de Borgia ascended to become Pope Calixtus III in 1455, young Rodrigo's path was illuminated with the kind of light that casts very dark shadows. At 25, he became a cardinal, not through prayer or devotion, but through the ancient currency of family connection. He arrived in Rome with hunger in his eyes and ambition coiled in his chest like a serpent waiting to strike. The Rome he entered was a city of magnificent contradictions. By day, pilgrims wept before gilded altars. By night, the same streets witnessed transactions that would have made ancient Babylon blush. The papal court had become a marketplace where everything, including salvation, carried a price written in golden ducats. Rodrigo understood this economy better than most. He accumulated benefices across Europe with the methodical patience of a spider building its web. His lifestyle resembled a Renaissance prince far more than a man of God. Lavish banquets, opulent palaces, and a succession of mistresses who bore him children with seasonal regularity. The most significant of these relationships was with Vanozza de Catane, a Roman noblewoman whose beauty was matched only by her political acumen. Between 1474 and 1482, she gave Rodrigo 4 children who would become central figures in the drama about to unfold: Juan, Cesare, Lucrezia, and Joffre. Each child represented a chess piece in Rodrigo's grand game, their lives to be sacrificed on the altar of their father's towering ambition. Even as a cardinal, Rodrigo's behavior scandalized Rome. No small achievement in a city where scandal was as common as morning bread. Pope Pius II wrote him a searing letter in 1460 condemning conduct in Siena that had shocked the whole city. But shame was a luxury Rodrigo could not afford. He had a papacy to win, and moral reservations were obstacles to overcome rather than principles to honor. The conclave of August 1492 unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of corruption. Behind the closed doors of the Sistine Chapel, 23 cardinals gathered to choose Christ's representative on earth. Gold changed hands with the fluidity of water. Promises were whispered like prayers. Benefices were distributed like communion wafers. When white smoke finally rose on August 11, 1492, Rodrigo de Borgia emerged as Pope Alexander VI, a victory achieved through what contemporaries openly acknowledged as simony, the buying and selling of holy offices. The Romans, surprisingly, celebrated. Bonfires illuminated the 7 hills. Torchlit processions wound through ancient streets. The new pope's coronation at St. Peter's was greeted with what observers called the greatest ovation any pontiff had ever received. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed divine providence had placed the right man on Peter's throne. Alexander began with measures that promised reform. He restored order to streets where over 200 murders had occurred in recent months. He established districts with magistrates empowered to keep peace. He personally heard grievances every Tuesday, dispensing justice with what observers praised as admirable efficiency. But power, like wine, reveals character rather than creating it. Alexander's initial reforms were soon overshadowed by his relentless pursuit of advancement for his children, particularly his sons, Juan and Cesare. The papal apartments during Alexander's reign became a theater where sacred and profane performed an obscene ballet. Dinners stretched deep into night, accompanied by entertainment that pushed boundaries even by Renaissance standards. Alexander's mistress, Julia Farnese, known throughout Rome as Julia la Bella for her extraordinary beauty, moved through Vatican corridors as freely as any cardinal. Her presence was a constant reminder that the Pope's spiritual vows had been trampled beneath earthly desires. Into this world of contradictions came Johann Burchard, a meticulous observer armed with a quill and an unforgiving memory. Born around 1450 in Niederhaslach, Alsace, this German priest had studied canon law and risen to become papal master of ceremonies, a position granting him intimate access to the most private moments of papal life. Beginning in 1483, Burchard maintained what he called his Liber Notarum, a detailed diary recording both magnificent ceremonies and scandalous conduct across 5 different pontificates. Burchard possessed the soul of an accountant and the eye of a court stenographer. His writings lacked the flourishes of contemporary chroniclers, but they carried the weight of truth precisely because of their dry, matter-of-fact tone. He occupied a unique position within the papal hierarchy, neither high enough to participate in corruption, nor low enough to be excluded from witnessing it. Like a shadow cast by candlelight, he moved through the Vatican's most private spaces, observing everything while appearing to matter very little. This invisibility became his greatest asset as a chronicler of papal vice. The events of June 14, 1497, changed everything. Juan's body was discovered floating in the Tiber River, his throat cut and bearing 9 wounds. The murder struck Alexander with grief so profound that observers wondered if divine justice had finally visited the Borgia family. For 3 days and nights the Pope refused food and sleep, weeping behind closed doors like a broken man. In his anguish, Alexander announced a program of church reform, calling for measures to restrain luxury, reorganize the chancery, and suppress simony and concubinage. But grief, like everything else in Alexander's character, proved temporary. Within months, reform proposals were forgotten, filed away like embarrassing letters from youth. The Pope's attention turned to Cesare, whose iron will and ruthless ambition would now drive the family's agenda. If Juan had been Alexander's heart, Cesare was his sword, sharp, cold, utterly without conscience. Cesare possessed a magnetism that drew admirers and enemies alike. Tall, handsome, blessed with intelligence bordering on genius, he resigned his cardinalate in 1498, the first cardinal in history to voluntarily abandon the sacred office and set his sights on secular power. Through siege warfare, assassination, and political manipulation, he carved out a domain in central Italy that made him one of Europe's most powerful men. His methods were so effective that Niccolò Machiavelli would later use him as the model for the Prince, admiring Cesare's ability to combine cruelty with efficiency. Such success required resources even papal coffers could not easily provide. The sale of indulgences, church offices, and cardinals' hats became systematic. Wealthy families could purchase ecclesiastical positions for their sons, effectively buying salvation along with social status. Alexander appointed 47 new cardinals during his reign, each appointment representing thousands of ducats flowing into the papal treasury and ultimately into Cesare's war chest. By autumn 1501, the Borgia family stood at the height of their power and perhaps their corruption. Cesare had successfully conquered the Romagna, earning praise from military observers throughout Europe. The Jubilee year of 1500 had brought hundreds of thousands of pilgrims to Rome, filling both the papal treasury and the city's brothels with equal enthusiasm. It was in this atmosphere of triumph and moral decay that Cesare conceived what would become known as the Banquet of Chestnuts. October 31st, 1501. All Hallows' Eve, when the boundary between sacred and profane was traditionally acknowledged to be at its thinnest. Whether the date was chosen deliberately or by mere coincidence, the symbolism was perfect. On a night dedicated to remembering the dead, the Borgia family was about to commit acts that would kill whatever remained of papal dignity. Cesare's apartments occupied part of the papal palace magnificently decorated by Pinturicchio during Alexander's early years. Frescoed walls depicted scenes from classical mythology and Christian history, an ironic backdrop for what was about to unfold. These rooms, designed to showcase Borgia wealth and cultural sophistication, would instead become the setting for an evening epitomizing everything critics had accused the family of representing. The guest list revealed the breadth of corruption the Borgias had achieved. Cardinals who should have been spending the evening in prayer mixed with Roman nobles whose wealth had purchased their silence about previous scandals. Diplomats from various European courts attended, perhaps viewing the evening as an opportunity to gather intelligence, or perhaps simply drawn by curiosity about how far the Borgias would push acceptable boundaries. But the true stars were the 50 courtesans Cesare had assembled. These were not common prostitutes, but sophisticated women who understood the delicate art of providing pleasure while maintaining the discretion powerful men required. Many had previous experience at papal entertainments. They knew the rules and the rewards awaiting those who pleased influential clients. Johann Burchard, in his capacity as master of ceremonies, was present that evening, not as participant but as observer. His official duties required availability for any ceremonial functions that might arise, even during private entertainments. This professional obligation placed him in perfect position to witness and record events other observers might have preferred to forget. According to Burchard's meticulous record, the evening began conventionally enough with dinner served in Cesare's private chambers. The meal featured seasonal delicacies appropriate to the guest's social status, accompanied by wines from papal cellars carefully aged in Roman caves. Conversation flowed smoothly, touching on politics, military campaigns, artistic patronage, topics allowing the assembled company to demonstrate sophistication and cultural refinement. The atmosphere changed as servants cleared dinner plates and the evening's true entertainment commenced. The 50 courtesans, dressed in silks and velvets carefully selected to display their physical attributes, began to dance for assembled guests. Music, provided by musicians sworn to secrecy, created rhythms encouraging increasingly intimate movement. What followed challenged even the broad definitions of acceptable behavior that had evolved during Alexander's papacy. As Burchard recorded with characteristic precision, the women initially danced clothed, but as the evening progressed and wine continued flowing, garments were gradually discarded until the entertainers performed completely nude. This transformation occurred gradually enough that guests could adjust comfort levels, but decisively enough that none could claim ignorance about the evening's ultimate direction. The centerpiece involved the chestnuts that gave the banquet its name. Servants removed candelabras from dining tables and placed them on the floor, creating pools of flickering light separated by shadows. Pope Alexander VI, according to Burchard's account, watched these proceedings from a seat of honor, accompanied by Cesare and Lucrezia. The presence of the Pope's daughter at such an event has puzzled historians for centuries. Was she willing participant or victim of circumstances beyond her control? Contemporary sources offer conflicting interpretations, but all agree she was present as the evening reached its climax of degradation. The final phase involved competitions among male guests to see who could achieve sexual relations with the greatest number of courtesans. Prizes were offered: tunics of silk, shoes, caps, and other luxury items representing significant value in an era when such goods were largely handmade. The competitions were conducted publicly, with servants keeping score of each participant's performance, transforming intimate human connection into spectacle for papal amusement. Burchard's account was preserved in the Vatican secret archives, sealed from public view for centuries. When Pope Leo III opened the archives to researchers in the late 19th century, he specifically expressed reluctance to allow access to documents that might damage Alexander VI's reputation. That such caution was necessary more than 4 centuries later suggests the enduring power of the scandal Burchard had so carefully documented. The morning after found Rome unchanged on its surface but fundamentally altered in its spiritual foundations. Pilgrims continued arriving for masses at St. Peter's. Cardinals maintained their schedules. The Pope himself appeared for public audiences as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. But knowledge of the previous evening spread through the city's network of servants, guards, and minor officials who had witnessed or heard about the papal orgy. Word traveled beyond Rome through diplomatic correspondence. Letters preserved in European archives document the shock of observers who thought themselves immune to surprise about papal behavior. Even representatives of secular rulers maintaining their own courts of considerable moral flexibility expressed amazement at what had transpired in the Vatican's sacred precincts. Reformers throughout Europe seized upon reports as evidence that the papacy itself had become irredeemably corrupt. Calls for church councils to depose Alexander VI gained new urgency, supported by detailed accounts confirming the worst accusations against the Borgia Pope. Alexander's response was characteristically defiant. Rather than expressing remorse or implementing reforms, he intensified support for Cesare's military campaigns and continued living with the same magnificent excess. If anything, the scandal seemed to liberate him from whatever restraints had previously limited his behavior, as if public acknowledgement of corruption freed him from maintaining even superficial respectability. Cesare's career continued flourishing in the scandal's immediate aftermath, suggesting moral outrage had little impact on political calculations in Renaissance Italy. His military successes earned continued praise from observers who admired effectiveness regardless of personal character. But success built on such foundations proved temporary. Alexander VI died on August 18, 1503, possibly from malaria, but surrounded by rumors of poisoning reflecting the atmosphere of suspicion and violence characterizing his reign. His death brought immediate consequences. Cesare's political support evaporated without papal protection, and he died fighting as a common mercenary in Spain just 4 years later. Lucrezia survived to become Duchess of Ferrara, but her later life was overshadowed by the scandals of her youth and her family's notorious reputation. The new pope, Julius II, refused to occupy the Borgia apartments where the banquet of chestnuts had occurred. He moved to rooms on the floor above, commissioning Raphael to decorate them with frescoes that would become some of Vatican history's most celebrated artworks. This physical relocation symbolized a broader attempt to distance the papacy from Alexander's moral failures, though damage to papal reputation proved more difficult to repair than damaged apartments. The scandal's impact on subsequent papal history cannot be measured solely in immediate political consequences. Alexander VI's behavior, culminating in events like the Banquet of Chestnuts, provided ammunition for Protestant reformers arguing the papacy itself had become irredeemably corrupt. Martin Luther's criticisms gained credibility from well-documented examples of moral failure at the highest levels of church hierarchy. The Counter-Reformation beginning in the mid-16th century represented, in part, a response to scandals like the Banquet of Chestnuts. Church leaders recognized moral reform was necessary to restore papal credibility and counter Protestant criticisms. The Council of Trent's emphasis on clerical discipline and establishment of seminaries for priestly education addressed problems dramatically illustrated by Alexander VI's conduct. Yet the broader Roman population's response reveals the complex relationship between religious authority and popular faith. Despite widespread awareness of Alexander's moral failures, pilgrims continued flocking to Rome. Masses continued being celebrated, and the sacramental system continued functioning. This suggests popular Catholicism had developed sufficient theological sophistication to distinguish between the personal worthiness of church officials and the validity of their religious functions. As we look back across more than 5 centuries at that candlelit evening in the Vatican apartments, we see reflections of humanity's eternal struggle between sacred aspirations and profane desires. The architectural setting adds haunting irony. Ancient gods and Christian saints looked down from Pinturicchio's painted walls as scenes unfolded that would have scandalized both pagan and Christian sensibilities, creating visual commentary on the distance between artistic ideals and human reality. The chestnuts scattered across those marble floors were humble fruits, transformed into symbols of how far human dignity can fall when power escapes moral constraint. They were gathered up before dawn, servants erasing physical evidence of what had transpired. But Burchard's careful Latin prose preserved those moments when the boundary between sacred and profane collapsed entirely, when the vicar of Christ became indistinguishable from the most dissolute Roman emperor. The candles are gone, the revelers dust, the rooms now museums. Yet questions linger of power, faith, and human frailty. In the Vatican archives, Burchard's Latin record endures, not judgment, but truth. The chestnuts are gone, but their shadow still darkens the fragile line between heaven and earth.